a very bizarre book. Blurb, he wrote an endorsement for it that appeared on the back cover. It's a new book by the right-wing provocateur Jack Posobiec, and who is the guy who promoted the theory that there was a pedophile ring in the Comet Pizza place in Washington, D.C. that led this guy to go in and shoot up the pizza place and there was not even a basement. So his new book is called Unhumans. And Posobiec's new book argues that leftists, Democrats, don't deserve the status of human beings in the United States. He said that they are unhumans and waging a shadow war against all that is good and decent, which will end in apocalyptic slaughter if not stopped. This is from the book. Quote, keep in mind when he says they, he's talking about people like you and me. He said, as they are opposed to humanity themselves, they place themselves outside the category completely in an entirely new misery-driven subdivision, the unhuman. He writes that progressivism is the latest incarnation of an ancient evil dating back to the late Roman Republic and through the French Revolution and communism. He said, often they write, great men of means are required to crush this scourge. Our history has brought us to this conclusion. Democracy has never worked to protect innocents from the unhumans. Keep in mind, the unhumans are Democrats, liberals, the left. One of the book's heroes is Francisco Franco. He's the guy who in the 1930s Civil War in Spain took over and became a fascist dictator of Spain right up until the 1960s when he died. They refer to him as the great man of history and compare him to George Washington. They write, quote, we do not believe in government through the voting booth. The Spanish national will was never freely expressed through the ballot box, end quote. It's an actual quote from a book that J.D. Vance just blurbed. Unhumans talks about Augusto Pinochet, the leader of the military junta who led a coup against Salvador Allende in 1973 in Chile, and then oversaw decades of torture and oppression, particularly in throwing political enemies out of helicopters, which is a real popular meme. I was downtown Portland a couple of years ago, and at one of these right-wing marches, and a bunch of the right-wingers were wearing T-shirts that said "Free helicopter rides for liberals." Same deal here. I mean, it's pretty unusual for a candidate for vice president to openly align himself with somebody who says democracy doesn't work, somebody who writes that we do not believe in government through the voting booth. The book goes on to say, quote, the great American counter-revolution to depose the cultural Marxist must occur on all levels of society they currently possess and on those they aim to seize. It is achievable only with the resolve of Franco. And, he's openly calling for dictatorship in the United States. So Mr. Vance, J.D. Vance, or Shady Vance, as they're calling him, he wrote in his blurb, he wrote, we need to do we need like a debathification program. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not his blurb. This is what he said in 2021 on the Jack Murphy podcast. He said, I think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them against the left. We need to do a debathification program, like a de-workification program in the United States. He said, we don't have a real constitutional republic anymore. Trump should fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, and replace them with our people. Well, that's what Franco did. That's what Pinochet did. That's what dictators do. In the book, Posobiec writes, much like the United States founding fathers, Franco and his fellows saw themselves as rebels intending to overthrow a corrupt, tyrannical government. Step by step, book by book, comment by comment, we are learning who Shady Vance really is. And it's pretty breathtaking. The other story that I wanted to share with you, this is grim stuff. I've told you before about provisional ballots. In fact, I was thinking about writing about this afternoon. Provisional ballots came into existence in 2004, I believe it was, when the legislation, it was called something like the Let People Vote Act. I'd have to go back and look up the name of the bill, but this was the legislation that George W. Bush pushed through Congress that was designed to solve the problem of Florida, because Florida had all these, different voting systems and whatnot, and it gave $5 billion to the states to buy voting machines. It was a big, kind of pro-voting machine piece of legislation. And what was interesting about it was it had this thing called a provisional ballot, and we'd never had provisional ballots before. It was called the Help America Vote Act. HAVA was the piece of legislation. And under HAVA, if you show up to vote but you're not registered to vote, or you've been deregistered or removed from the voting rolls, you are still given a ballot. It's called a provisional ballot. And you fill it out and you think that you voted. You feel like you voted. But the only way that ballot gets counted is if you show up in person at the Secretary of State's office with your birth certificate and your ID and your passport or whatever the state requires to prove that you're an actual legal citizen and you live where you say you live. And then the provisional vote can be counted. So the vast majority of provisional ballots are just never counted. Well, Texas now has put 2.1 million people on a voter suspension list. They haven't they haven't done what Georgia, what Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp have done in Georgia. They haven't removed people from the voting rolls. Instead, what they've done is they've taken 2.1 million people, most of them in big cities, and therefore presumably Democratic voters. They've taken 2.1 million people and put them on this list that they call suspended, which means that all 2.1 million of those people, when they show up to vote, will be given a ballot, and they will think that they voted, but it will be a provisional ballot. And unless they show up at the Secretary of State's office in person within a couple of days of the election, their ballot will never be counted. But they'll think they voted. So that way you don't get the blowback that you get in Georgia when people show up and they're told, I'm sorry, you're not even on the voter rolls, see you later, go away. In this case, I mean, this is just such an elegant scam that Greg Abbott has put together in Texas. This is a big deal. And, we need to be paying attention to it. I laid this all out in some detail in my book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. And the provisional ballots have been a big part of the Republican war on voting ever since the Help America Vote Act, was passed in the early 2000s. So, amazing stuff. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back.